the Kyle Lanslone Show. Very excited to be wrapping up the week here with my antiwar.com colleague, Dave DeCamp. Dave, how you doing today?
I'm good, Kyle. Thanks for having me back. Always good to talk to you.
Of course, always excited for you to be here. You do some of the most important work out there. For anybody who doesn't know, you must follow Dave on Twitter at DeCampDave and read his daily write-ups at antiwar.com. 5, 6, 7 articles every single day on all the most important news issues dealing with U.S. foreign policy. And Dave, I got quite a lot of that I want to get into you with today. So Trump has requested a pardon for Netanyahu. Are we on Al Qaeda side in Syria? Very important question. And U.S. escalating military action in the Caribbean. So let's start off with the pardon. This was big news yesterday. Trump sent a letter to the Israeli president asking him to pardon Prime Minister Netanyahu, who's in the middle of, I think, 4 different corruption charges right now that he's trying to fight in court. And this is what the Israeli opposition leader Yair Lapid had to say on the issue.
But there comes a moment when people who call themselves the national camp also need to say to the American president, listen, we are a sovereign country. There is a limit to interference. It is precisely the nationalists who should say, listen, you can't send letters and demand a pardon for the Israeli prime minister in a criminal proceeding. We are a proud country. We are a sovereign nation. We are not a protectorate of anyone. It can't be that the Prime Minister keeps running to you for help and you issue letters calling to grant him a pardon. A country that is proud of itself, with national dignity, with a large national camp that crosses both coalition and opposition, does not behave this way. And there are plenty of people here who spend all day telling us what kind of national pride we should have. First and foremost, the Prime Minister, and secondly, the Justice Ministers should have approached the American President and told him, sir, we ask you, stop interfering in this matter because we have our pride. We are not an American protectorate, we are an independent country, and it pains me that the national camp is not behaving like a national camp. Thank you very much.
So, Dave, I'm wondering what you think this pardon letter says about the U.S.-Israeli relationship.
Well, I mean, Netanyahu has come under a lot of criticism lately because of how involved the U.S. has become in the whole situation with Gaza, opening this military outpost. And just, it seems like almost every day there's a U.S. official sitting down in the prime minister's office talking to Netanyahu about this deal. But this is something, you know, I mean, Trump has twice, at least before this, has called for a pardon of Netanyahu, once in a post on Truth Social, and again when he was actually speaking to the Israeli Knesset. But this is more of a formal request in the form of a letter to the president. And I think it says a lot about the Trump administration's approach to Israel and Gaza and everything that's happening in the region. And their approach is that, you know, they're giving Netanyahu basically a big hug. They're trying to bring him close and say, calm down, everything's going to be okay. We got your back. Don't worry, you know, you do this and we'll do this for you. And this approach is not going to bring any kind of peace or solve any conflicts in the region. So it's not a good sign for the chances of peace here. And, you know, it is like such blatant interference in a country's internal affairs. Of course, Israel certainly, it goes the other way as well here in the United States. I don't think I need to convince your audience of that. But, you know, and we've seen this. Mike Huckabee, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, he attended one of Netanyahu's hearings, corruption hearings, and he's been very openly pro-Netanyahu, was negotiating with members of the Knesset trying to convince them not to quit the government. So this is kind of continuing a pattern of this Netanyahu-Trump alliance.
Yeah. So, Dave, you mentioned in your response there about a U.S. military facility being built in Israel. Can you just give us some details on that?
Well, yeah. So since the so-called ceasefire went into effect, the U.S. has established, I forget exactly what they call it, the Civilian Military Coordination Center, I think, in southern Gaza.
Yeah, that's
Sorry,
right.
in southern Israel. and there's about 200 U.S. troops there. Now there's reporting from Israeli media that the U.S. is actually planning to build a large military base in southern Israel on the Gaza border to house thousands of international troops. And now that was reported by it was Ynet, and this Israeli investigative outlet Shomrim reported this. And there was also a report from Bloomberg about how the U.S. Navy was seeking information about how much it would cost to build a large military facility in southern Israel to house 10,000 people. So now, since that report came out, U.S. Central Command said that the report was not accurate. But if you look at their statement, they're not exactly denying that they're planning to build this big base. They basically said the report is not accurate. No U.S. troops are going to Gaza. But the report didn't say that the troops were going into Gaza. And we've really seen this a lot from this administration. They have like these denials of things that they're not real denials. What's her name? Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary. When the initial report said that the U.S. was sending 200 troops to Israel to monitor the ceasefire, she said, "Oh, this is false." 200, but in the same statement, she said that 200 American soldiers who are in the region will be monitoring the ceasefire from Israel. So she said it was false while also confirming it. So it was kind of a similar statement. I mean, they didn't confirm it, but it wasn't a real denial. And I contacted the State Department. They referred me to the War Department, and then I didn't get anywhere from there. But the War Department, I know, referred the Israeli outlets to CENTCOM, and this is the best that they could come up with was this statement. So I think that means that this is a real potential here, the U.S. building this big base. Oh, and the report said that it would cost about $500 million.
Well, just another big waste of money to build a military facility, which I guess right now is on the border of Gaza. But I believe you had an article at antiwar.com, Dave, saying that there's some real threats that there could be a partition of Gaza. And I was just wondering what the kind of details were there.
Yeah, that was based on a report from Reuters that cited a whole bunch of European and officials from other countries saying that they feared without real progress on this ceasefire deal. And there's so many unanswered questions about this international force or, in the disarmament of Hamas, that they fear that without any progress, the so-called yellow line is going to become a de facto border, which means permanent or indefinite Israeli occupation of Gaza. And I do think there's a lot of signs that this is kind of the direction that we're heading. You have Jared Kushner really pushing this idea of only allowing reconstruction in the Israeli occupied side of Gaza and not, as a way to pressure Hamas. And that's something Arab countries are warning that could just lead to permanent Israeli occupation. It's kind of like the West Bankification of Gaza that we might be seeing here, except it's much worse because you have just, the Palestinian civilians are just living in this wasteland, and they're not getting real relief, and they're not allowed to really rebuild, clear the rubble, clear out all the unexploded bombs. So unfortunately, it seems like this is kind of going to be the status quo, at least for now, and potentially really for the long term. And these other ideas that they're cooking up is to build some communities for Palestinians in the Israeli occupied side, that they would let Palestinians who were screened and approved by Israeli intelligence to go live there. I mean, it's just hard to believe that, many Palestinians would volunteer to do that. And then you also have the Israeli-backed gangs and militias that are apparently in communication with the U.S., and they're viewed by Hamas and probably a whole lot of Palestinians in Gaza as collaborators. So they wouldn't have any legitimate authority. But apparently the U.S. is considering using them as like law enforcement. But that would just lead to fighting between them and Hamas. And I think that's something Israel is probably pushing to do, is kind of stoke an inner Palestinian conflict.
Well, that is just insane, Dave, because I think I remember about a month ago, Trump was saying that Hamas had authority to go in and clean out those same gangs that Israel had been propping up during the onslaught in Gaza that's been going on for the past 2 years. So they're now reversing on that, and they're going to use the gangs against Hamas. Is that really what's being discussed in the White House?
I mean, according to the reporting in Israeli media, and there's actually been similar language we've seen. Jared Kushner, when he talked about building up the Israeli occupied side, he said, we could build a new Gaza there. And that's the same language one of these militia leaders used is like we're going to build the new Gaza. It's a whole plan. We're going to take over. So I think there's a lot of signs there that this is something that they're really considering. And the biggest one is this gang led by Yasser Abu Shabab, who, according to the UN in 2024, was responsible for like the most aid looting in southern Gaza, and he himself admitted to looting and taking from the trucks, as he put it. And there's members of his gang. I know one at least. Apparently, according to Egyptian intelligence, actually fought with ISIS in the insurgency in the Sinai Desert. So, and then there's other links to ISIS, when it comes to smuggling over the border.
Well,
So,
maybe they'll invite him to the White House, Dave.
yeah, that's right.
I do want to circle back to Netanyahu's pardon and how that does tie in with the ceasefire, because you wrote this up at antiwar.com, great article. There's been some speculation that Trump is asking for a pardon for Netanyahu because Donald Trump understands that Netanyahu will never let the conflict end unless he doesn't have to worry about the trial, right? Because every time he's supposed to testify, Dave, oh no, a Hamas attack. Oh, we have to go to war with Iran. Oh, now we're back at war in Lebanon. You know what I mean? There's all these different excuses he has. National security threats. I can't go testify that day. Now, I've also seen some people point out, and I do wonder if this is the case, that this is also undermining Netanyahu's standing in Israel. I think you drew an important distinction in your first response there, where just because people say Israel has control in the United States, or, the White House, the Pentagon, Congress has occupied Israeli territory, they're not talking about Israelis in general. They're really talking about Likud, Benjamin Netanyahu, and the, kind of political elite in Tel Aviv. And so while that pardon letter may be kind of good for Netanyahu if he actually does get convicted, it seems like it's also maybe working against him a little bit. There was a recent poll in Israel that 70% of Israeli citizens felt that Israel was a client state of the US. This can't really help that narrative at all. And so what do you think Trump's bigger play here is, and how does this factor into the ceasefire?
I mean, I think this might have been part of the deal to get I think this is something that Netanyahu probably wanted. I doubt that he would send this letter if Netanyahu didn't want him to. So my guess is that it was part of the, you say, hey, you agree to this ceasefire deal in Gaza. I'll ask for a pardon for you. I think Netanyahu's pretty shameless about, trying to get his way using whatever means he can. And then that narrative, that I've seen from people kind of in the MAGA world that, with Trump, Trump's playing some 4D chess here, because if Netanyahu gets pardoned, then he doesn't have a reason to continue all these wars in the region. But I think he's always going to have some reason. His political, he wants to remain in power. And it seems like the wars have really helped him do that. He doesn't want a real investigation about October 7th. So I think kind of keeping the country in a state of war will continue to prevent that from happening.
Absolutely. Dave, I do want to talk to you about Jolani's visit to the U.S., but first take a note here that the chat is pretty active. I appreciate all you guys out there. They're happy to see Dave back on the show. You are the most frequent guest of the show, so be sure you're subscribed and that you hit the share button. Help us get out there to a few more people. Now, Dave, I have this clip for you. This is Abu Mohammed al-Jolani, veteran of the Iraq War, having fought for al-Qaeda in Iraq, sitting down with Fox News.
Do you, Mr. President, have regrets that al-Qaeda carried out those attacks that killed 3,000 Americans?
I was only 19 years old, so I was a very young person, and it didn't have any decision-making power at that time, and I don't have anything to do with it. And Al-Qaeda was not present right then in my area. So you're speaking to the wrong person about this subject.
Well, Dave, I didn't hear a no, and I really have to ask you. I know we're about the same age. You actually were a New Yorker, so you probably had, were a little bit more exposed to this than I was in the center of the country. But the idea that somebody who not just fought for al-Qaeda in Iraq, but actually founded an Al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria, would come to the United States, would be welcomed in the White House, and then almost even more baffling, given a friendly interview on Fox News. What do you make of this?
Yeah, it's it's something I said the other day, like, even during the height of the war in Syria, when it was clear that the US was on Al Qaeda's side, like if somebody would have told me that 10 years from now, Jelani is going to be the president of Syria and he's going to be welcomed at the White House, he's going to sit down, he's going to actually have a trip to New York City, sit down with David Petraeus, and then be, given a friendly interview on Fox News. Like, I just would have thought you were crazy. It's like all the conspiracy theories coming true here. But yeah, with Fox News, especially because it's like the center of kind of the hysteria about, radical Islam. Especially I remember just in the post 9/11 years when I was a kid. And just recently, with Mamdani winning in New York City, all this stuff saying he's a jihadist and all that. And then like a literal Al Qaeda member who, it was interesting when I wrote up the story about the UN lifting the sanctions on Shara or Jelani. I looked at the listing and it says notable associates include Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the founder of ISIS, and Ayman al-Zawahiri, bin Laden's number 2, who, it's not like this, like you said, it's not like he just enlisted to fight in the insurgency and then that was that. He was a senior leader deputized by actually al-Baghdadi to start the Al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria, which he led. And then, clearly his rebranding was an attempt to get international support, and he was probably directed in some ways by Western intelligence agencies. So yeah, and then here we are. And we have a story at antiwar.com on the page right now that I wrote about how U.S. Central Command said that they conducted 22 military operations in Syria over the past month, including operations with the new Syrian government led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, led by this Al-Qaeda group, Al-Qaeda offshoot. And so we're actually like, because people argue, say, oh, what, you're against engagement, you're against putting the past behind you and engaging with people that you previously fought with. And that's not the case at all, obviously, for me. But what I am against is, first off, helping this guy take over the country. That's happened already. So, there is a reality that has to be dealt with. But making him an ally, I mean, this isn't like they're just like accepting, okay, he's in power, let him try to rebuild. No, they're embracing him. There's a report that the U.S. might establish a military base in Damascus. They are now part of the anti-ISIS coalition, and they're actually carrying out raids with these HTS guys. And there was one botched raid that, according, don't know exactly what the story is because there's kind of conflicting reports, but they killed a guy who apparently they shot him and captured him, and then they found out that he worked for HTS, and they let him go, but then he ended up dying of his wounds, but he was a known ISIS commander. So, like, there's a lot of fluidity here between ISIS and HTS, and, like, it raises questions about, is there a risk to the U.S. troops who are going to be involved, in these operations? Are they giving them intelligence to carry out, basically attacks on their rivals to consolidate power? I mean, that's probably what we're going to see here. So the whole thing is just crazy.
Well, absolutely. I mean, the U.S. in Afghanistan really struggled not to have I think they call them green on blue attacks, right? Having the Afghan army that were training get infiltrated by the Taliban and then one of them kill a U.S. soldier. But this seems to be more reminiscent of what the U.S. was doing in Jordan. And I think maybe 2015, 2016, we are training up some Syrian rebels there. We called them rebels, the opposition to a Bashar al-Assad, which was really just Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And one of those fighters killed 3 of our troops. And so, honestly, Trump's policy, sending Americans and having them operate with these guys, if any of those troops die, I 100% put the fault of their deaths on Donald Trump. This is a absolutely suicidal policy for our own soldiers. And I can't believe we're going down this road. Now, I did want to ask you got multiple write-ups on this at antiwar.com. I think I have this one about Shar says Trump didn't bring up his Al-Qaeda past in the White House. But Dave, what was discussed between guy Ahmed al-Shara, who's really Abu Mohammed al-Jolani, and Donald Trump during that White House meeting?
Well, according to the Syrian side, they discussed investments, U.S. investments. I think Shara knows how to, is trying to speak Trump's language. And this is something he said in the interviews afterward. Like, there's a lot of opportunity, and especially extracting gas in Syria for American companies. So that was discussed. And also like the military alliance, like them joining, that has officially happened. Syria joining the U.S. anti-ISIS coalition. And I think it was like a 2-hour meeting. They discussed cologne, according to a clip that I saw. Trump gave him some nice Trump cologne, and he gave him a MAGA hat too. So they were real chummy together.
Yeah. I mean, I don't support Guantanamo Bay torture prison, Dave, but had they rerouted his plane there, I think that would have been a far better solution for Americans than welcoming him into the White House. Now, before I wrap up here, Dave, got to talk about our own hemisphere, got to talk about what Trump is doing in Latin America. There seems to be a real build-up towards regime change. You have this story at antiwar.com. U.S. aircraft carrier arrives in Latin America amid push towards war with Venezuela. So, Dave, I just want to ask, how far down this path are we? How close are we to actually being in a war with Venezuela? And I guess that would mean, conducting strikes inside Venezuelan territory, or, maybe targeting like actually military targets inside Venezuela or something like this.
Yeah, it's tough to say because a lot of this is like a psychological operation. They're trying to scare Maduro. So the latest, there was a report from CBS today that said Trump was presented with options to attack Venezuela. We've just seen so many reports like this. So, I'm not like that alarmed by it. But at the same time, this might be part of the PSYOP, is to keep us, off guard for when they actually attack. But, we saw over the past couple weeks reporting that Trump was kind of souring on the idea, worried of turning Venezuela into like a Libya. But at the same time, we see this military buildup continue, this aircraft carrier arrive, these airstrikes on boats continue. So there is, kinetic military action is happening. So these are not idle threats to Venezuela. So I still think it's very possible that we end up in some sort of war here. I don't know when, like the timeline. I think, again, sometimes I'm skeptical of this stuff, but the way I understand it from reporting and from people who know more than me about what's actually happening in the administration, basically Marco Rubio is really pushing for some kind of war here. And apparently Stephen Miller is on board, but some other elements of the administration are warning about, what are we going to do after? If we take out, decapitate the government, what are we going to do? The opposition saying, oh, everything's going to be fine. We're going to walk right in and it'll be great. But it seems like there's skepticism of that within the Trump administration. So I'm really hoping that they win the day here. And I kind of have a feeling that the current situation now is kind of going to hold like this for a while. I could be wrong. We could start bombing. This CBS report said that the options were for attacking Venezuela in the coming days. Right. But it did say that no final decision was made. So, I'm kind of leaning more toward this not happening in the next few weeks or months. And then hopefully in that time, Trump backs off on the idea. But at the same time, they seem very determined to keep bombing things in the region. And then there's these reports about potentially taking the military into Mexico. So they're looking to expand this. It's like this attitude that they have is like, oh, we got this huge military. Let's use it. Let's use it. Not just, like I've seen some people justify this, say, oh, we're finally taking care of our hemisphere instead of, the Middle East or Africa. But we're still doing all those things too. We're seeing actually an increase in the U.S. military footprint in the Middle East. We're still bombing Somalia, still building up in Asia. So it's like, we're still doing all that stuff. Could we end some wars first before we start new ones in our hemisphere?
Yeah.
And I think that a big reason why Venezuela is being targeted is because they can do this to Venezuela and nobody's going to really, stick up for them or defend them.
Yeah. So, and you make a great point there, Dave, where I think it was a Madeleine Albright quote. She was getting pushback. I think it was from a general or secretary of defense or something about going to war. And she said, what's the point of having this military if we're not going to use it? I mean, that's the actual level of thinking that we have among the political elites. And that was 20, 30 years ago when there was probably a higher degree of thinking than there is today within the halls of the White House. Now, one reason I am getting increasingly concerned here, Dave, is things are not going well for Trump domestically. People are turning against his immigration policy. They kind of recoil and don't like these raids and the way Kristi Noem is presenting that. The economy is not doing very well. Trump's poll numbers are down. And then there's this that the Colombian president brings up, and I want to get your thoughts on this.
Un clan de pedófilos quiere acabar la democracia en Colombia.
A clan of pedophiles wants to end democracy in Colombia.
Pero ahí está la realidad.
Harsh,
Para que no
yes.
salga la lista, entonces
But
los
that's the
envían
reality.
acorazados a matar pescadores.
And so that the list doesn't come out, they send armored vehicles to kill fishermen from this city
Que si dictador o no,
and to threaten the neighbor,
que el pueblo de Colombia
whether
va a
dictator or not,
aplaudir
how.
a su
That the
hermano
people of
que no
Colombia
es
are
el
going to applaud if they
presidente,
invade their
sino el
brother
pueblo
who
de
is not the
Venezuela.
president but the people of Venezuela. A president of Colombia who does that, a president cursed by future generations because he will never be forgotten as a traitor. The government of Venezuela has made many criticisms, but I do not mock the people of Venezuela, nor do I set a trap so that the people of Venezuela fall into the snare of an invasion that is only after their oil. What they want is more greed and violence to turn this beautiful corner of the South American continent into a Syria and Iraq, a Libya full of slaves, of slave markets, of new black people. No, the list of Stein's friends, which they don't want to appear in the United States, wants to use us here with violence so that the people of the United States don't think about their own government, but instead become more xenophobic and racist. The ideas of a superior race and other false ideas, and they use us so they don't have to discuss their own problems.
So, Dave, he's referring there to the Epstein list, of course. And I know this isn't like something we necessarily follow at antiwar.com, but we certainly have seen examples in the past where, Bill Clinton was wrapped up in the Monica Lewinsky scandal and he destroyed the former Yugoslavia. And so it certainly seems like the White House is concerned about this. They did everything they could not to have the discharge petition go through the House. They even brought Laura Blobert into the Situation Room to try to pressure her. They put all the pressure they could. Mike Johnson has kept a congresswoman out of being a representative for 2 months to prevent this from moving forward. There seems to be real pressure here. So any concern that all these domestic issues are going to push Trump to launch a war to distract from his issues here at home?
Yeah, that's a good point. That's certainly something we've seen before, and nothing distracts and also gives the executive more power, like a war. So what is it? I think they have enough signatures now, and they're saying Massey says that means they're going to have to release the files in December or something, or there's going to be a vote in December.
Yes.
And yeah, and it does seem like the White House really does not want that to come out. So, yeah, I think that's certainly a risk.
Yeah. And as one of the commenters asked, do you think Trump will get Gavin Newsom or Cory Booker elected in 2028? I don't think either of those men have, certainly Cory Booker, maybe Gavin Newsom. But I do think that, to the spirit of the question, that Donald Trump could actually end up getting AOC or somebody like that elected in 2028 with the way he is going, where he claims to be a peacemaker while fueling Israel's genocide in Gaza, allowing the Ukraine war to drag on, provoking wars all over the place, killing people in the Caribbean, and then also not doing anything here for the benefit of Americans. Dave, any thoughts on that before I let you go?
Yeah, I mean, I think the midterms will give us another good, idea of how they're going to do. But, if things don't turn around, I think there would be a little chance of Vance winning in 2028. And yeah, who knows who the Democrats are going to run. I wouldn't be surprised. You mentioned AOC. I wouldn't be surprised if they go with her.
Yeah, it would. It's something that I could only imagine happening if Trump's presidency continues the same train wreck it's been the first 9 months. Dave, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate you coming on the show. Of course, you're the most frequent guest. I try to get you on at least once a month because you are the person that is in the weeds every single day covering this. You know all the statements that everybody is making, and so you could give really thorough and better analysis than almost anybody else. So we'll have to do it again soon. And guys, make sure you're following Dave on Twitter at DeCamp and reading him at antiwar.com every day. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Kyle.